I heard George Floyd saying, I can't breathe, please get off of me. I can't breathe. He cried for his mom. He was in pain. It seemed like he knew. It seemed like he knew it was over for him. He was terrified. He was suffering. This was a cry for help.
He seemed like he knew it was over for him. Unlike most trials, unlike most issues of justice in America, there is some common evidence here because so many people watch that video. As I mentioned, the fact that this is being relived is how it is supposed to work in our justice system because people are very literally bearing witness for this jury to ultimately decide an individual's fate. And that same testimony became quite emotional as she recounted again. This is her bearing witness. This is her testimony, or this is what she experienced that she's telling the jurors. They'll decide what to make of it. But she recounted something very personal. How she says under oath, all of this had her thinking and feeling that Mr. Floyd, as he lay there being killed, as he lay there dying, could have been her father.
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad, I look at my brothers, I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they are all Black. I look at that and I look at how that could have been one of them. It's been nights. I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more and not physically interacting and not saving his life.
A witness recounting their experience and, as she put it, her own subjective personal feeling of responsibility or guilt. We begin with our experts tonight, NYU Law Professor Melissa Murray and Civil Rights Attorney David Henderson. Good evening to both of you. Much has already occurred in these first 2 days of the trial, David. We begin with that human note for you. I'm curious what you thought of both the substance, the moral substance of what she said, as well as how that might affect a jury that ultimately will be looking at the humanity of Mr. Floyd, the decedent, as well as weighing that against whatever judgments they make about Mr. Chauvin.
Absolutely, Ari, and I think you captured it well with the clip that you played where Darnella was talking about how when she saw George Floyd, that made her think of her own family. That's precisely why diversity is important on the jury. Jurors tend to make decisions that are most effective when they identify with what's at issue in the trial. I think that need for their personal safety is something that at least some of the jurors will identify with George Floyd. The testimony was effective, also having young witnesses, children put things so well. I thought that the 9-year-old who said that the EMTs asked for Derek Chauvin to get up nicely, and he wouldn't, I would be making PowerPoints with that on my slide right now if I was preparing for this closing argument. It will be effective. The only thing you have to think about is there's so much of the trial left to go. You just hope the jury keeps it front and foremost in their minds.
Professor Murray?
Well, yesterday we saw the prosecution essentially lay out the skeleton for their case, and all of that seemed to turn on the video. Today they began to add flesh to that skeleton, showing how all of these individuals observed this. They found it unorthodox. They found it to be unreasonable in their view. Many of them reached out to call the police. We heard from Genevieve Hansen, that off-duty firefighter, who believed that there are more things that the police officers could have done to assist Mr. Floyd during this period. All of these testimonies were basically aimed at showing that Mr. Chauvin's actions were contributing to Mr. Floyd's death, a substantial cause of his death, and more importantly, that they were not reasonable in the scope of the exercise of his duties. And those are critical things to make clear. And all of the witnesses were really, I think, profoundly strong witnesses today. And I think you have to think about the defense at this point, really wondering if it's necessary to put Mr. Chauvin on the stand to humanize the defense a little bit.
Well, you just put your finger on it, Professor. This is a tragedy, but many tragedies are not illegal. The prosecution's been quite effective in these first 2 days at moving it past a tragedy and really meticulously showing through, as you say, a multitude of evidence and multitude of witnesses. This was unreasonable force. It was not a close call in their argument. This was what people who are involved in law enforcement, who are quote unquote allies of police or work hand in glove with them, thought, what is going on? Something's wrong here. As an observer as well, I'll share with viewers, I found the first 2 days to be quite effective for the prosecution. We always caution, you got to see the whole trial to know where it's going to land. But so far, and in that vein, I want to also play here the witness who was a first responder, also joining in what was this, again, sad chorus of people looking at police armed with guns killing someone and grappling in that moment with what they could and couldn't do. Take a listen.
I offered to walk them through it, or told them, if he doesn't have a pulse, you need to start compressions, and that wasn't done either.
How did that make you feel?
Totally distressed.
Were you frustrated?
Yes.
David, I've been careful to emphasize that this is the process of bearing witness. It's not content. It's certainly not entertainment. But in the justice system, it is a reckoning, because the jury is going to look at that uniformed individual, at her response, even if she's perhaps reliving the trauma, and they can draw factual deductions from that. I wonder what you thought of that moment of testimony.
100%, Ari. The way that we talk about court cases in an environment like this, we're discussing the law critically, it's very different than the way a jury deliberates. I thought the most impactful testimony today was simply the reaction of the witnesses who were asked to revisit these events. So 100%, that will stick first and foremost in their mind. And if you want my opinion on whether or not Derek Chauvin has to take the stand, it's because of moments like that. Because of moments when the witnesses break down and are clearly upset. I think he has to get on the stand and explain why there's a different way to view these events. I'm not saying I agree with that. I just think that gives him his best shot.
Yeah, interesting that you both raised that point, and that's something where we're going to be tracking. Professor, I want to play more from this again. It's broadcast, so a lot of Americans have been seeing it in real time, but for context, we want to dig into this. Is a part where that witness who took the video talks about Chauvin, quote, shoving in the knee into the neck. Take a look.
Did you feel threatened by the police officers?
Yes.
Did you feel threatened by Mr. Chauvin?
Yes.
So was there any point in your video, whether it's 9 or 10 minutes, that Mr. Chauvin ever let up or got up off of the neck of Mr. Floyd that you saw?
No. If anything, he actually was kneeling harder. Looked like he was shoving his knee in his neck.
Professor, walk us through how this testimony relates to one of the defense arguments, which was previewed yesterday, that somehow this crowd was a threat or a potential threat to the officers. This testimony seems to, at least according to one witness, cut the other way.
Well, the argument on the defense side is that the crowd was berating them and making it distracting, difficult for them to focus on, maybe even to the point where they feared the crowd itself. But this really turned that on its head, and I think really showed that for George Floyd, this was certainly a traumatic moment, but it was also a traumatic moment for every single person who had to witness it. And that goes to the whole idea that this was not just a crime against George Floyd, it was a crime against the people of Minneapolis, of that whole community, and they were thinking about sort of the larger impacts. I think we saw that today with those witnesses, many of whom were minors who will never forget what they saw on that day.
And David, I want to play as well from the teenage witness, again, this discussion of helplessness. Take a listen.
You could see in his face that he was slowly not being able to breathe. His eyes were rolling back. And at one point he just kind of sat there.
Why is this difficult for you to talk about?
It was difficult because I felt like there wasn't really anything I could do as a bystander. The highest power was there, and I felt like I was feeling it. I couldn't really do anything physically what I wanted to do because the highest power was there at the time.
So we went through a process.
David, I mean,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
No, we went through a process where we saw the lawyers picking a jury. And one of the things that it's easy to forget is the jury also has to pick a lawyer. It's easy to forget, but a lot of these jurors said they haven't seen this video before, so they certainly have no idea what to expect from these witnesses who are going to testify. You're still in the phase where each side is trying to build credibility. The worst thing you can do during that part of the trial is overstate something or misrepresent what to expect. The fact that all of these witnesses were so polite, so respectful, so easy to believe, strongly cuts against the way the defense has played their cards so far.
Yeah, a fair point, and what I was just going to get at was, although there's more than one way to interpret things, I will say that in all fairness, the fact that the defense didn't even try to do anything with some of these witnesses who were minors, I think speaks to the fact that they knew it was a bad day for them, but they also were strategic enough to know that trying to fact check or rebut what appeared to be quite credible, honest testimony, so heartfelt from these, I will say, brave young people would have made their day worse for their defendant, and they just sort of took that in. It was a striking day. We'll be covering this as thoroughly and fairly as we can. We'll be coming back to many of our experts, so we'll be seeing you again, Professor Murray, Counselor David Henderson. Thanks to both of you.